Looks like maybe this is us today. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Second Sunday Forum for this month. I'm pleased to get to introduce Barbara Gabioud. Barbara's been a lifelong UU who grew up in the Minnesota Twin Cities area. She moved from Duluth to Las Cruces in 1976 to go to grad school and has stayed in the gorgeous state of New Mexico for the majority of her career as a speech-language pathologist. She worked mostly in the public schools with 3- and 4-year-old developmentally delayed children. Barbara and her husband, Ron, front row here, met in Albuquerque and moved to Silver City in 1994 and raised their 2 boys there. It just so happens that the UU Fellowship in Silver City was forming the same summer that they arrived, so they have participated in it from the ground up and watched their congregation grow from about 15 members to over 70. Their fellowship has always had a strong social justice presence in the community, but their border project was anything but planned. Barbara gave us a summary of their border work a few years ago, but much has changed then by both necessity and choice, as you'll soon hear. We are fortunate to get to catch up on their amazing success story directly from Barbara. Please welcome her back to the church.
Good morning. My husband, Ron, he's the one with the matching t-shirt, so it's easy to spot him. They're not our t-shirts. These are from No More Deaths, which is a border group in Tucson. And we bring greetings from our fellowship. It's always nice to meet UUs in other parts of the state. Closer? Even closer. Oh, I can tell. All right. All right. First, before we start, I think it's a good idea that we do a little mental geography about where we are and what we're doing. So if you kind of picture in your brain a picture of New Mexico, and then think about El Paso, Texas, and where that is. Way down south. An El Paso Border Patrol sector includes all of Texas and almost all of New Mexico. So El Paso, Juarez area figures a lot in everything we've done. No problem. So then if you think of El Paso, and about an hour north of El Paso is Las Cruces, which I hope some of you have been to. It's right where I-10 and I-25 meet. Then you go west about an hour. Everything's an hour apart. You go west from Las Cruces about an hour, and there's Deming, New Mexico. An hour south of Deming, New Mexico, is Palomas, Old Mexico. So it's right on the border, but on the Mexico side of the border. Back to Deming. And then an hour northwest of Deming, up in the mountains at 6,000 feet, is where we are in Silver City, right in the Gila National Forest. I don't know how many of you have been there. You're always welcome to come back. We have our fellowship there, and we'd love to see you with us, too, sometime. So, as Tyler said, our border project kind of just came out of nowhere. It started exactly 5 years ago on Mother's Day weekend in 2019 with an email that began, "Urgent need for help from your Deming UU friends." As far as I knew, the only UU in Deming was 88-year-old Thelma Moore, there on the screen, who had joined our fellowship a few years before, and she attended whenever she had someone who could drive her up to see us in Silver City. She was a strong, charismatic person who we all cared about. Thelma had her granddaughter and young family living with her in Deming, and that Mother's Day, her daughter Joyce was in town from Washington State. And we couldn't say no to Thelma. And that's how it started. It was an immediate humanitarian response, just as if our neighbor's house had burned down. That day, in May 2019, the U.S. Border Patrol, out of El Paso, had suddenly started dumping hundreds of legal asylum-seeking families at the bus stop in Deming, because Deming is on I-10 and it's on the Greyhound bus route to everywhere. These folks had no money, had been on the road for months, and were exhausted, malnourished, and in terrible physical condition. There were lots of children, and few spoke English. They wandered the streets looking for churches and anyone who could help them. Let's see if, yay. And Deming stood up big time. First at the county fairgrounds and in an old World War II airplane hangar, and then at the armory in town. A new Deming organization, now called Colores United, appeared. Ariana Saludares was the volunteer coordinator for Colores United, and most importantly, Thelma was her grandma. So in keeping with a family tradition, none of us could say no to Ariana. The asylum seekers were en route to other parts of the country to sponsors or family members. They needed sleep, showers, clothing, medical care, and food. But most importantly, they needed to have transportation arranged to where they were going. Sponsors generally paid, and most people were traveling by bus. They were in Deming for maybe 2 or 3 days until they got tickets. It was an uplifting venture to be part of, although I've been the visible spokesperson for our border project in Silver City, and we use the UU Fellowship Building as our hub. It ballooned into a total community project and has obviously gone beyond the borders of Grant County. Besides the dozens of people from Silver who went down to directly help in Deming, our fellowship began twice-weekly collections of food, water, clothing, medical supplies for Colores United, and we coordinated packing hundreds of emergency food bags that we now call go bags. We were sending 4 to 6 carloads per week, including the go bags, which were given to families, 1 per day for each family member for the length of their bus trip. And we included a small toy or coloring book in every bag. I found an email that I wrote in May 2019 saying, "My guess is that as time goes on, fewer donations will be coming in, but you never know." And I've continued to say that every week for 5 years. You may even see someone familiar in one of those pictures. So, before I go on, I need to make it clear that I am not an expert on immigration law, nor do I know all that's happening along the border. I just happened to be board chair of our fellowship when we got Thelma's email, and I've tried ever since to stay on top of the politics and news that affect our corner of New Mexico. Please use your handouts, which have lots of definitions and explanations, because I know how confusing the border situation is. In the spring and summer of 2019, asylum seekers were crossing the border wherever they could and waiting for Border Patrol to pick them up. They had the right, under international law, to cross the border anywhere and request asylum as soon as they encountered Border Patrol. And after being successfully processed, most were released into the U.S. In contrast to asylum seekers who must individually request entry in the United States, refugee status can be a category given to a circumstance that affects thousands of people. Haitian refugees were admitted after the horrendous earthquakes of 2008. Afghans were admitted to this country as a group with special status. My mother was a refugee. She was a 17-year-old Jewish girl living in Vienna, Austria in 1938, who was sent out by her parents as what now would be called an unaccompanied minor. And I wonder if we'll begin to accept refugees from Gaza. Almost 10,000 asylum seekers went through Deming, a town of about 15,000 people, in less than 4 months in 2019. But MPP began, and we were feeling the slowdown even by the end of July. We quit packing go bags in October and had no more collections. The most important things to remember about 2019 are that all the guests in Deming were legal asylum-seeking families. All of it happened in this country, and it was pre-COVID. And that's the end of chapter 1 of our origin story. Now to back up just a little bit before starting chapter 2. MPP was the practice begun by the Trump administration to push asylum seekers back into Mexico to wait for their court dates after they were initially processed. MPP stands for Migrant Protection Protocols, but has been better known as Remain in Mexico. That's when we began seeing the tent cities in Matamoros and hearing about all the violence in the streets of Juarez as people backed up by the thousands all along the border. Those folks were already in the system, having requested asylum, passed their credible fear interview, and were just waiting. And now, chapter 2. There is a border crossing from Palomas, Mexico, into Columbus, New Mexico, an hour south of Deming, but very few migrants are allowed to legally cross there. Although the wall and infrastructure have been built to gargantuan proportions. That's Palomas. In the fall of 2019, the fire station in Palomas held 4 or 5 asylum seekers awaiting U.S. entry. And then the fire station burned down. The cartels in Palomas started to extort large sums of money from migrants just to allow them to enter a hotel and rent a room. We were hearing rumors that a new shelter in a Palomas community building would open for families seeking asylum. And it did, Tierra de Oro. It opened right before COVID hit in spring 2020, and then all asylum hearings were shut down. Tierra de Oro soon became a small, stable population of families, many from Cuba, Brazil, and some Northern Triangle countries, that is Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. A different population than asylees in 2019. They weren't exhausted from walking, but they're exhausted from waiting, not needing clothing, but needing protection from COVID and the cartels. For almost the next 2 years, we were involved with Tierra de Oro. We helped them celebrate birthdays, weddings, quinceañeras, new babies, and holidays. We monetarily supported insulation for the building, fencing, construction of extra bathrooms, medical care, cooling and heating, maintenance, staff stipends, and food. Oop, something got missed here. There we go. If you're wondering about that picture in the middle, it's a Cuban baseball player trying to stay in shape with his homemade barbells, and there's a pig there behind him. At the same time, in spring 2020, during COVID now, U.S. Border Patrol, using Title 42, started dumping large numbers of people into Palomas, not Deming this time, who were caught trying to cross the border between legal ports of entry. 80 to 100 people a day into a town of 5,000. Numbers fluctuated wildly. Coyotes were making big bucks. These folks were primarily migrant workers trying to cross the border for work to support their families. They're the migrant workers our country depends on, our essential workers. They would try repeatedly to cross the border, legally or illegally, and be at the shelter very short term for food, new shoelaces, medical care, and sleep. Mainly men, but some women and children. These people were not turning themselves in to Border Patrol. In fact, most would just try to cross the border again and again. They were being expelled from the U.S., not deported. No record of anything was kept, like being bounced back off a rubber wall. These groups of expelled migrants were generally transported in the middle of the night and delivered to the Palomas office of Grupo Beta, a branch of the Mexican government charged with aiding migrants throughout the country. Not all of the expelled needed assistance, but we restarted sending our go bags, now with COVID masks and electrolytes instead of toys. We sent them to Grupo Beta in Palomas, and many of the migrants would sleep temporarily in hastily constructed tents outside of Tierra de Oro. And because of COVID, the two populations at the shelter had to be kept quarantined from each other. In May 2021 alone, over 1,200 people were expelled to Grupo Beta in Palomas. Oops. Sandra Magallanes and Juan Rascon were our eyes and ears in Palomas. There was room for about 50 asylum seekers inside and 70 for transient migrants in back, but it often got overcrowded. There we go. And this is the point, while we were still in chapter 2, that we presented via Zoom to your congregation in July of 2021. So if you have a better memory than I do, my words might sound a little familiar. And your congregation was already supporting our work with van loads of supplies and financial contributions. And we've gotten to know Tyler pretty well these past few years. After the Biden administration was elected, not as much change as we had hoped for. In December 2021, New Mexico shelters finally started to receive asylum-seeking guests, most coming from ICE and Border Patrol detention centers. Afghans, Haitians, Africans, Cubans, and South Americans released in t-shirts and flip-flops in wintertime. Colores United continued to stand up, They contracted with a couple local hotels in Deming for shelter and were getting some FEMA funds. And in Palomas, after a joyful, toyful Christmas celebration for the kids and families in December 2021, as if COVID wasn't bad enough, 2 children came down with chicken pox. And a Mexican health order closed the shelter to transient expelled migrants. So back to the fire station they went, and Chapter 3 immediately began. Although the fire station is obviously a municipal facility, we took over most of its operation with Sandra as the coordinator, along with Grupo Beta. In fact, they asked for our logo for the outside wall, and we didn't have a logo, but we do now. For various reasons, we then let Tierra de Oro operate independently and turned all our attention in Palomas to the fire station. For the next 1.5 years, we transformed it and even extended it into another building as hundreds kept coming. We quickly paid for a used wood cook stove, wood and propane for heat, and bought hundreds of burritos for those overnighting there. They needed a second bathroom and a shower stall, a washer and dryer, internet service for cell phones, and once again, heating and cooling. In what most of us would consider the space of an efficiency apartment, 30+ people might bunk together. It has 11 actual beds, but one night, 108 people slept in the fire station, plus an extra building. I would often lament to Sandra about the cramped conditions, and she always answered me in the same way. But they're safe. And as important as all the basics are, Sandra provides a welcoming, caring space that is home and family for as long as people need to be there. Over 2,900 guests stayed at the Bombero station in just the first 5 months of 2023. And then Chapter 3 ended. On May 12th, 2023, exactly a year ago today, after many postponements, Title 42 finally was lifted, and it launched us into Chapter 4. The backlog of Remain in Mexico asylum seekers began working their way through the system, and Border Patrol no longer dumps anyone into Palomas. The CBP One app was rolled out last May, and all asylum seekers are expected to use it to obtain an appointment to cross at a specific port of entry. Now, the Palomas shelter holds a more manageable number of people who try day after day for often several weeks or months to get an appointment. Can you see what it says on the cell phone? Unexpected error. We pay for the internet service that's essential for everyone there. But also keep in mind that according to international law, asylum seekers do not have to use specific ports of entry. They do not need an appointment, and they do not need a sponsor. They only need to request asylum on U.S. soil. The other photos highlight the banner made at the fire station a couple months ago for the March for Dignity in El Paso to commemorate the 1-year anniversary of the fire in Juarez, in which 40 migrants burned to death in a locked detention center. The banner displays the countries the migrants were from. The march was also in support of El Paso's Annunciation House that the Texas Attorney General tried to shut down. And in actuality, the countries on the banner also represent the 6 construction workers who died in the recent bridge collapse in Baltimore, and very likely the construction workers who will rebuild it. Thus, the small altar with the candles back at the fire station in Palomas the night of the collapse. Even though we have only a few guests there every night, we aren't ready to hand control back to the town of Palomas. We don't know what the next chapter may be on the border. We just cleaned and painted the shelter, got a new biochar heater, bathroom sink, and are fixing the plumbing. There was even a funeral for a recent guest. And since Title 42 lifted, our go bags once again are very much needed in Deming, back in the US now with no masks. Regular busloads of family arrive several times a week, usually with about 50 people each, to the newest Colores United shelter. It's a repurposed motorcycle repair building that has been lovingly transformed. We currently have 2 collections per month for so many of the things that FEMA doesn't cover. We also make a monthly monetary contribution for whatever comes up. Deming is the guest's waypoint for their journeys to families and sponsors. In 2023 alone, 9,400 guests were welcomed in Deming. Again, more than half of them children, and that's just since May 12th. On the left, you see a busload of primos, family, being welcomed from the Border Patrol bus at the Deming shelter. Then sent on their way, mostly through the El Paso airport. And hopefully, many will be able to come U.S. citizens, just like Sandra did back in 2021. My intention was to make this history part of my talk fairly short, and I didn't do that. But I hope you see that when we just look at the microcosm of Deming and Palomas, how complicated our border and our policies are. What's happening in our corner of New Mexico is magnified 100-fold across the border and into the interior of the U.S. One little change impacts the lives of thousands and thousands of people. At this moment in time, our Border Justice Project packs 200 go bags for Deming every Monday, and we have 2 collections a month of food, clothing, craft supplies, medical supplies, personal hygiene needs, toys, and the list goes on. Our on-the-ground team of worker bees is diverse. Our go bags are mainly packed by Sufis. Our team for Wednesday afternoon collection pulls from everywhere. We were all wearing masks during COVID, so I didn't even know what Greg or Dorothy looked like for a couple of years. And we knew the cars going through the line by their license plates or the dogs hanging out the window. I've been amazed by the power of email and social media. Our email lists of people have grown to over 750 and continue to grow. Chapter 4 continues, but I doubt it's the end of our story. I continue to send emails twice a month. We've had donations from at least 30 states and a few foreign countries. Members of all faith communities participate. 15 just in Silver City. Who knew? When I asked people in an email what faith community, if any, they belong to, the largest group by far was none, because kindness and compassion are inherent qualities shared by everyone, and they're the lifeblood of our project. Because we've held the scope this morning to just Deming and Palomas, I hope I've given you sort of an insider's view of the border. If you'd like to be on my email list, let me know. My address is on the sheet of definitions, and I also have some cards. But now I get to share some of my opinions, not just history. I think that what asylum seekers need most in the U.S. are work permits and affordable housing. We have a shortage of workers in this country and thousands of migrants wanting desperately to work and support their families. They need to be seen as an asset rather than vermin to be kicked to the curb. Many of them are skilled workers and professionals. No one complained about the slave trade being a bunch of losers and criminals. Patriots even sailed thousands of miles just to bring them to our shores. Today, why aren't corporations lined up at the border to recruit workers with decent wages and shelter? We would all gain so much. Secondly, I believe that many of the worst problems in Central America and much of the rest of the world were created by the U.S. and our allies. We interfered in their politics, and corporate greed stripped economies of natural resources. We're complicit in the current tragic situations that have and are occurring. I feel we have a responsibility to absorb the downriver ills we created. And I'm not going to touch on climate change. But as we go forward in an election year, be aware of the words you hear and use about the border. Just as you use, many of us have trigger words like God, church, and religion. How do invasion of rapists, mass chaos, illegals, and poisoning the blood of our country sound to you compared to economic opportunity, a wealth of entrepreneurs, and essential workers? Also, what should New Mexico do compared to what Texas has done? We don't hear much from Santa Fe. So that's the end of what I have to say. I guess it's time for any of you to share your opinions, your ideas, ask questions. I'm not quite sure, Tyler, how we keep going on this for a conversation. Did I talk too long? No.
I have something to share that would be funny if it weren't so serious, but we belong to a UU fellowship in Mexico, in the center of Mexico, San Miguel.
Oh, yeah.
Down by a couple hours from Mexico City. But we have a group there, had a group there, but I think it's not organized anymore. But just to show you some of the you called it downstream ills the U.S. causes. When we capture illegals, or there was a program where we took Mexicans and sent them across the border. And what we did is stick them on buses or whatever and took them across the border to, they didn't know where they were going, and neither did we, and we dumped them over there. And they got off the bus, they didn't know where they were, they had no money, if they needed insulin or anything, they didn't have it. And so what the San Miguel UU Fellowship did is organized, and we had attorneys, what do you call them? Attorneys concerned with immigration.
Oh,
That's
okay.
it. And because they didn't have, they got dumped over there, they didn't have work permits, and they need all sorts of information about themselves to get a job, and they didn't have that. And
Yeah,
we
they
figured,
need work permits and travel permits, anyone
Okay.
in Mexico, yeah.
okay, so these attorneys worked real hard, and other people worked in the fellowship worked real hard. They spent every day for a whole year working on these problems, trying to get so people could get over there, get into their own country and get a job. First of all, they had to find out where they were. Then they had to get money to pay for transportation to get back to their families. They didn't know where they were. And then we had nurses and doctors lined up because they needed medical care.
Yep.
And some of them needed insulin immediately. Anyway, it just struck me as funny, ha. This is the opposite. Look what we caught. This border issue is something else. I'm done.
I have a lot of opinions I haven't shared.
Oh, you haven't gotten started.
Barbara, could you talk some about the bigger financial picture? How much, do you have any idea how much money your support team has spent over the last X years, and what is your plans for maintaining financial supply?
I ask for money every 2 weeks. And actually right now in Grant County, we're going through something called Give Grandly. All the nonprofits in Grant County are a part of that, where the whole community is asked to contribute to their nonprofits. And we actually are quite lucky right now. We have a person who is willing to match 1-to-1 all donations through May 20th for us. We go through about $5,000 a month for our project because we try to, for Palomas, that the money we spend, we try to spend it in Palomas because it's a very poor town and it needs the support of what we can pay for down there. And it also creates a little bit more goodwill within that population for the people who are staying at the shelter. And then we also do our collections. But yeah, we go through about $5,000 a month. That's what we figure. So we'll take any donations.
So sort of related to that, I know you've gotten some support from churches and others in Santa Fe. And those are people that we might want to partner with in the future. Are there some specific organizations you can think of that have been real active there?
David Henkel with the Quakers in Santa Fe. Every 6 weeks or so, he brings a truck down full of stuff, gives us some financial donations, and on the way down, he stops and picks up things from Rio Rancho, who also support with stuff and money. So we've been real lucky, and David is a great network with Quakers. And Quakers are one of the major groups that work with us too in Silver. But it really is, even though it's through our UU fellowship, it's everybody. We've gotten to know some wonderful, kind, generous people.
If we email you, will you send us something where we could send money, or?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, that would be good.
Yes, I can put, my email address is on that paper we handed out. I have some business cards too, but I'll put you on my email list, and then you can kind of follow what we're doing if you do donate money to know what we do with it. So.
It's a very nice newsletter that she puts out every 2 weeks to bring you up to date.
I'm just curious. This sounds like a full-time job, Barbara. How many hours do you spend? Do you suppose?
Ask Ron.
Ron.
But it has a lot of blessings with it.
Any other comments, questions?
Oh, here's one.
My name is Susan, and the reason I'm asking this question is because I don't know enough about the immigration steps. If someone is turned away for some reason, what happens?
If someone is turned away
From the
at the
border.
border, they have to go back. But a lot of people who come through and request asylum go to ICE detention or Border Patrol detention centers, sort of have background checks made, and then they're released into the U.S. to their sponsors, which is why Deming is getting so many people. And there are huge shelter lots of them in El Paso, Las Cruces, Albuquerque has some. There's one in Jemez somewhere, too. But those people then are kind of on their own until their case comes up, which could be years. And really, the majority of people do show up for their asylum hearing cases in court. And that's one of the things that they're really hoping. I think that immigration policy that didn't go through a few months ago included getting asylum hearings faster. Because being an asylum seeker is a temporary status. It's not a permanent status.
When they do have a sponsor, what is holding them back besides legal papers?
Holding them back from?
Moving to the sponsor person?
They do. That's what like I was saying in Deming, they arrange their transportation, but they can't arrange transportation to their sponsor until they cross the border, and get a plane ticket, say, for 2 days later, because they don't know exactly when they're going to get across.
That's a little gray for me. I can't.
Yeah, that's what they do, and they've got a really good database to get people tickets and get them turned around and to where they're going. Most of them are not planning on staying in Deming. Most of them are going other places where there are communities of people from Venezuela or Nicaragua, El Salvador, wherever. There's people from India, Cuba, Brazil, Ecuador now coming through. It's just amazing, the variety of countries. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
I've been to the shelter in Deming now twice, and just I highly encourage anybody who wants to go to get in touch with me. And in the fall, when we do another big collection, this past year it was 5 different congregations in the community. We took down almost 140 boxes and cash. But just to go there and see, this is where these mats are folded out so that 70 people can sleep on the floor at nights. This is the room they can go and pick clothes from. This is the room where all the food is stored. And just knowing that 100 people to 200 people a week are coming through this place, being processed, moved on. It's an amazing operation. It's worth seeing.
My next question,
Sure.
but I wanted to give other people a chance, was we have many abandoned or vacant military bases. Has that ever been an option to house these people?
I think that was the case in El Paso a couple years ago, right, Ron? They were using some things at Fort Bliss. But, COVID was such a strange period. And
so we're beyond that now. So is there a possibility of reigniting that?
I don't know. That's something that happens farther up the chain of command, I think. And, it'd take that cooperation with various pieces of the government. I think it's an excellent idea. But again, that's a temporary placement. They're wanting to go to communities. They want to become
Well, it could act as
productive.
a community college for those who need to transition into American life.
That's a possibility, yeah. Yeah, if that's in a community that they want to be in. Again, they're wanting to find family oftentimes. I don't know where those bases are, but I think it's a great idea.
Anyone else? Barbara, thank you so much
All
for
right.
coming all this way and putting all this energy into this for years and then particularly for today. We appreciate it.
All right. Well, happy Mother's Day to everyone.